At 10:47 p.m., my dad called me with a shaky voice and said, "Paper matters." 2 months later, he was gone, and my stepmother started clearing clutter. Then I saw my father's most treasured watches listed in a Charlotte auction catalog under a private collection. My name is Ethan. I'm 38 years old and I live just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. I work as a network technician for a regional hospital system. Steady job, decent pay, lots of quiet driving between facilities, and more time alone in my head than I probably need. I'm telling you this because the kind of story I'm about to share doesn't happen to people who live on drama. It happens to people who think for most of their life that if they keep their head down and do the right thing, things eventually balance out. I used to believe that. My dad, Richard, was the person who made me believe it. He wasn't loud. He wasn't one of those men who filled a room with jokes. He had this calm, almost stubborn decency, like he'd decided a long time ago that being fair was a discipline, not a mood. When I was a kid, he'd work overtime, come home exhausted, and still sit at the kitchen table to ask about my day like it mattered. My parents divorced when I was 13. It wasn't explosive, not in the way people imagine. It was more like a slow leak that finally became obvious. My mom moved to Raleigh and I stayed with Dad. That detail matters because it meant Dad and I became a unit. Not best friends, not two bachelors. More like teammates. We didn't talk about feelings much, but we understood each other. He remarried when I was in my mid-20s. Her name was Dana. Dana was polished, always looked put together, even in casual clothes. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and somehow make everyone feel like they needed to adjust themselves. Shoulders back, voice a little softer, laugh a little more polite. She worked in real estate, and it showed in the way she spoke. Confident, measured, like every sentence had been practiced once in her head before it left her mouth. At the beginning I tried. I really did. I told myself Dad deserved companionship, and Dana seemed to make him happy. She laughed at his dry jokes. She kept the house brighter. New curtains, new paint, little upgrades that made Dad's place feel less like the home of a widower in waiting. But even early on, there were moments that didn't sit right with me. Dana didn't like being questioned. Not openly. She wasn't aggressive about it. She'd do this thing where she'd smile and tilt her head as if you were adorable for even asking. If I asked something simple like, "What time are you guys meeting for dinner?" she'd answer, "Oh, you don't need to worry about that, honey," in the same tone someone uses with a child. And whenever Dad and I talked about money, just practical stuff, Dana would suddenly appear in the doorway. Not to argue, just to be present, like the conversation needed a witness. Still, I stayed respectful. I visited on weekends, helped with repairs, took Dad fishing once in a while. Dana was never outright cruel. She just claimed space, slowly, consistently, like she was moving furniture in a room until you realized you didn't have a chair anymore. The one thing Dad and I still shared that Dana never fully understood was his watch collection. And when I say collection, I don't mean he had a drawer of old Timex watches. My dad loved watches the way some people love classic cars, not just for value but for the craft, the history, the feeling of time being measured by something built to last. He started collecting after the divorce, not as a midlife crisis, more like a quiet hobby that gave him structure. He'd read forums, study movements, learn about brands and models the way I learned network diagrams. He wasn't reckless with it. He saved, bought carefully, sold sometimes to upgrade. He kept every service receipt in labeled envelopes. As a kid, I used to sit at the table while he cleaned them. He'd open the casebacks with this delicate toolkit, like he was doing surgery. He'd show me the gears and explain what a movement was, why certain brands were respected, why a scratched crystal could be replaced but a damaged dial changed everything. When I got older, he started letting me wear one occasionally, never the rarest pieces but still nice. And every time, before I left the house, he'd say the same thing. "Don't flash it. Watches are for you, not for other people." That was Dad in one sentence. Dana tolerated the watch hobby at first. She'd roll her eyes sometimes and joke about the tiny little machines. But the longer they were married, the more she seemed to resent them. She didn't like that they lived in a safe bolted to the floor of the closet. She didn't like that Dad spent Saturday mornings at the workbench, listening to jazz and polishing a case instead of getting things done. She didn't like that there was a part of his life he'd built without her. And I think most of all, she didn't like that I was part of it. Because Dad and I spoke the same language when it came to those watches. Dana heard it like code. She'd walk in mid-conversation and get that tight smile, like she'd just stepped into a room where people stopped talking when she arrived. Then, about 2 years ago, Dad's health started changing. At first it was small things. He'd forget words. He'd lose his train of thought. He'd repeat stories. When I mentioned it, Dana dismissed me instantly. "Richard is fine," she said too quickly. "He's just tired. You're always looking for problems." But I knew my father, and he knew something was off too, because one afternoon he called me, not Dana, and asked if I'd go with him to a doctor appointment. That was the beginning of the long, ugly reality. Early-stage neurocognitive decline that moved faster than anyone wanted to admit. Medications, evaluations, safety discussions. Dad stayed proud through it. Dana stayed controlling. She inserted herself into everything. She started driving him to appointments even when he asked me. She insisted she be the point of contact with the clinic. If I asked Dad about his test results, Dana would jump in and summarize, always conveniently vague. If I called Dad and he didn't answer, Dana would text back, "He's resting," like she was a gatekeeper and I needed permission to care. I tried not to escalate. I told myself Dana was scared. I told myself she was overwhelmed. I even told myself that maybe I was being too sensitive, too protective, but the pattern kept tightening. And then one day I noticed something that bothered me more than it should have. Dad's watch box wasn't on his dresser anymore. It wasn't the safe, just the display box where he'd keep a rotation of a few pieces he liked to wear. Usually 6 watches lined up like soldiers. That box had always been there. It was part of the room. I asked Dana casually, "Hey, where'd Dad move the watch box?" Dana didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh, I put it away." It was clutter. Clutter. That word hit me wrong because it wasn't about the box. It was about permission. Dana had started making decisions in that house like she owned not just the space, but the story. Dad came into the room a minute later, moving slowly, looking tired. I asked him directly, gently, "Dad, did you want the watch box moved?" He stared for a second like he was trying to understand the question. Then Dana laughed lightly and said, "He doesn't even notice, Ethan. Don't make a big deal out of nothing." Dad looked at me, then at Dana, and said quietly, "If it's in the way, it's fine." It sounded like agreement, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like surrender. From that point on, I started paying closer attention. I offered to help Dad organize his watch paperwork, just as a project. Dana said it wasn't necessary. I asked where the service receipts were kept. Dana said she'd handle it. I asked Dad if he still enjoyed the hobby. He said, "Sure," but his voice didn't carry the same warmth. Then came the night Dad called me after 10 p.m. He sounded unusually clear, like a fog had lifted for a moment. He told me he'd been thinking about getting things in order. Not in a dramatic way, just practical. He asked about my mortgage, my savings, whether I had life insurance through work. I remember standing in my kitchen with the lights off, holding the phone, listening to him talk like he was taking inventory of the future. At the end of the call, he said, "If anything happens, don't let things get messy." I asked him what he meant. There was a pause. I heard Dana's voice faintly in the background, asking who he was talking to. Dad lowered his voice. "Just promise me you'll be smart. Paper matters." That was all he said, and then he hung up. 2 months later, my father died. It wasn't sudden like a heart attack. It was slow, and then all at once. A fall in the bathroom, a hospital stay, complications, and then a quiet phone call from Dana while I was at work. Her voice was controlled, almost rehearsed. "Richard passed this morning," she said. "You can come to the house later." I pulled over on the side of the road and sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel like it belonged to someone else. Grief does that. It turns your body into a place you don't recognize. The funeral was small. Dana kept it that way. Richard wouldn't have wanted a fuss, she told people, which might have been true, but the way she said it made it sound like a policy decision. After the service, people came to Dana with hugs and condolences. She accepted them like she was receiving awards. When someone approached me, Dana would sometimes drift closer, as if she needed to hear what they were saying, like she needed to monitor the narrative of my own loss. In the days after, I tried to be patient. There are legal steps after someone dies. There are emotions. There's paperwork. I didn't want to be the guy asking about assets while my dad's side of the closet still smelled like him. But Dana moved faster than grief. Within a week, she was talking about clearing things out and simplifying. She said she needed to sell some items because medical bills were expensive, even though I knew Dad had good insurance and a decent savings cushion. And then, on a Wednesday evening, Dana called me and said something that made my stomach go cold. "I'm sending Richard's watches to be auctioned," she said. "They're just sitting there, and honestly, they're probably not worth much. It's better to turn them into cash than let them collect dust. I didn't speak for a second because I was trying to understand how someone could say that about the one thing my father had cherished with steady, quiet pride. When I finally found my voice, I asked, "Did Dad tell you to do that?" Dana sighed, like I was exhausting her. "Ethan, you're not thinking clearly. Richard is gone. I'm his wife. I have to make decisions." I started to respond, and she cut me off. "And before you get worked up," she added, "this isn't up for debate. I'm handling the estate. You'll be informed of anything you need to know." Then she hung up. I stood there with my phone in my hand, listening to the silence after the call, and I realized something with a clarity that felt almost physical. This wasn't just about watches. This was about erasing me from my father's life while I was still standing in it. I drove to Dana's house that night with my jaw clenched so tight my teeth hurt. It still felt wrong calling it Dana's house. It was my dad's house, the one he'd bought years before he even met her. The one where I'd scraped my knees on the driveway, where he'd taught me to change a tire, where the kitchen drawer still had the old wooden spoon he used for chili like it was a lucky charm. But when I pulled into the driveway, the place already looked different. The porch light was brighter, whiter. The wreath on the door had been changed. Through the front window I saw a new lamp in the living room, and the framed photo of Dad and me from my college graduation, one of the few pictures he displayed, was gone from the side table. Dana opened the door before I could knock, like she'd been watching. "Ethan," she said, with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I was just about to sit down. "I'm not staying long," I said. "I'm here about the watches." She stepped back to let me in, but her body stayed angled in a way that told me exactly where the boundaries were. Inside, the house smelled like lemon cleaner. Not recently tidied, but scrubbed of evidence. The hallway runner had been replaced. Dad's old boots weren't by the door. Dana walked toward the kitchen, and I followed, passing the bedroom hallway. The closet door that used to be slightly ajar where the safe was bolted into the floor behind hanging coats was closed. I stopped there without thinking. Dana noticed and said casually, "I've been organizing. Where are the watches right now?" I asked. She didn't answer directly. She opened the fridge and took out a bottle of sparkling water like she had all the time in the world. "They're secure," she said, "and I told you I'm sending them to auction." "You keep saying sending," I said, "like it's already done." Dana twisted the cap, took a sip and nodded. "It is." The room felt smaller. My hands were shaking, but I forced my voice to stay even. "Dana, those watches aren't just property. Dad worked for them. He cared about them. You didn't even like them." She raised her eyebrows. "That's not fair." "It's accurate," I said. "And you know what else isn't fair? You acting like I don't get a say in anything." Dana's smile faded. "You are not his spouse. I am. I'm his son." Dana's eyes flicked over my face like she was assessing how far she could push before I pushed back. Then she did what she always did. She took the moral high ground and sharpened it into a weapon. "Ethan," she said gently, "you have no idea what it costs to keep things running. The mortgage, the utilities, the funeral, Richard's hospital stay. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because I have to." I knew enough to question that. Dad had owned the house outright for years. I'd helped him refinance and pay it off early after the divorce. Dana hadn't put her name on that deed until later, and even then Dad used to joke about how he'd finally let her. But grief makes you hesitate. It makes you doubt your own instincts, because the last thing you want is to become the villain in someone else's tragedy. So I tried a different angle. "Okay," I said slowly. "If you're going to sell them, at least let me see what's being sold. Let me review the list. Let me buy a few back directly before they get split up." Dana stared at me for a beat, then laughed softly. "Buy them back," she repeated. "From me." "From the estate," I corrected. Dana leaned her elbows on the counter. "Here's what you're going to do. You're going to let me handle things. And you're going to stop acting like Richard left you in charge." That sentence snapped something in me. Not rage exactly. Something colder. A clear understanding that she wasn't overwhelmed. She was strategic. I left without yelling. I didn't slam the door. I just walked out, got in my car and sat there for a minute with the engine off. Dad's last call played in my head. Paper matters. The next morning, I called the attorney whose name I found in Dad's old file cabinet. It took me an hour to locate the key to the cabinet because the drawer had been rearranged. But the label on the folder was still there in my father's handwriting. Legal. The attorney's office receptionist put me on hold, then came back and said the attorney, Mr. Halverson, was in court but could schedule a consultation. When I explained that my father had passed and I needed to understand the estate process, the receptionist's tone changed slightly, more cautious, more formal. She asked for my father's full name and date of death. Then she said, "I'm sorry. We can't discuss anything without the personal representative." "I don't even know who that is," I said. There was a pause. "The file indicates Dana Richardson is listed." Of course it did. I called Dana to ask directly if she'd opened probate, if there was a will, if there was a personal representative appointment. She didn't pick up. She texted an hour later. "Busy. I'll let you know when there's something to know." That text did two things at once. It told me she was already moving pieces around, and it told me I was not part of her plan. So I did the only thing I could do without permission. I started building my own paper trail. I went home and dug through every email Dad had ever sent me that mentioned watches. I searched words like serial, service, insurance, safe, appraisal. I found old photos he'd texted me when he bought a new piece, close-ups of dials, clasp engravings, the tiny stamped numbers on the case. I found a message from 3 years earlier with the subject line, "For your records." It had a PDF attached, an insurance schedule, not a will, not a deed, but it listed the watch collection as a separate line item with estimated value. It wasn't a complete list, but it was enough to confirm what I already suspected. Dana calling them probably not worth much was either ignorance or a lie. The total estimated value on that schedule was higher than my annual salary. I stared at that number until my eyes went dry. Then I remembered something else. My dad's friend, Martin. Martin was the guy Dad met through watch meetups. Older than Dad by a few years, retired early, always smelled faintly like pipe tobacco even though he didn't smoke. He'd show up at Dad's house sometimes with a small leather roll of tools and a loop in his pocket like a doctor. If anyone knew where those watches were going, it would be Martin. I called him. He answered on the second ring. "Ethan," he said, and his voice immediately softened. "I'm glad you called. I've been thinking about you." "Martin," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." He didn't hesitate. "Of course." I told him what Dana said. Auction, consignment, worthless, all of it. There was a long silence on his end. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. "She's already contacted a house," he said quietly. I was afraid of that. My throat tightened. "You knew?" "Richard mentioned she'd been asking questions," Martin said. "Not about the watches, about how quickly you could liquidate a collection." He said it bothered him. He didn't want conflict, so he didn't push. I gripped my phone harder. "Do you know which auction house?" "I didn't at first," Martin said. "But yesterday I got an email from a consignment manager I've dealt with before. She asked if I could help verify some pieces for an incoming lot because the consignor was claiming they were junk, but the intake photos told a different story." My heart started beating faster. And I recognized the background," Martin said. "Richard's workbench, the scratches on the wood, the green mat he used. Ethan, those pictures were taken in his office. Dana had gone into my father's space, laid his watches on that bench like evidence, and photographed them for strangers. I felt sick. "What's the name of the house?" I asked. Martin told me. "A reputable consignment auction company in Charlotte, one of the big regional ones. Not an online-only sketchy seller. The kind of place that handled estates, jewelry, collectibles, that mattered because reputable houses follow procedures. Procedures meant documents, paper matters." I thanked Martin and ended the call, then sat at my desk and stared at my laptop screen for a full minute before I typed the auction house name into the search bar. Their website was clean, professional, full of glossy photos and polite language, trusted, transparent, client-focused. I found their upcoming catalog preview page, and my stomach dropped again. There it was, a section titled Fine Watches and Horology, with thumbnail images that I recognized like faces. My dad's Omega Seamaster with the navy dial. His vintage Rolex Datejust with the slightly worn bracelet he always said felt honest. The Tag Heuer Dad bought the year I graduated. He said he wanted one modern piece that isn't precious. There were more, too many. Each listing had a lot number and an estimated range. Some of those ranges were conservative, some were not, but none of them were worthless. I clicked through the photos, zooming in until I could see the tiny imperfections, the same ones I'd seen in my father's hands. I could practically hear him explaining why that specific scratch didn't matter, why that patina was beautiful, why a service history was like a medical record. And right there in the description of one of the lots was a line that made my skin prickle. Property from a private collection. Not estate of Richard Richardson. Not consigned by Dana Richardson. Nothing that confirmed ownership. Just private collection. Like it was being intentionally blurred. I didn't call Dana again. Not yet. Instead, I called the auction house directly. A woman answered with a calm customer service tone. I told her my name. I told her I had reason to believe items in their upcoming watch sale belonged to my late father. There was a pause, just long enough to make me feel the weight of what I was saying. Then she asked, "Are you the consignor?" "No," I said. "I'm his son." "I'm sorry for your loss," she said. Her voice was still polite, but it shifted into something more guarded. "If you're not the consignor, I can't share private client information." "I'm not asking for private information," I said carefully. "I'm telling you there may be a dispute over ownership. If those watches are sold and the consignor didn't have legal authority, we have documentation for all consignments," she said. And for a second I thought that would be the end of the conversation. But then she added, "If you believe something is being consigned improperly, you can submit a written claim and our legal department will review it." "Good," I said. "Tell me where to send it." She gave me an email address, claims@with the company's domain. She also told me to include supporting documents. Supporting documents, that's where I hit the wall. Because what did I have right then that proved those watches weren't Dana's to sell? Photographs, old texts, an insurance schedule, a lifetime of memories. None of that was a deed. None of that was a contract. None of that was the kind of paper a legal department respects. I emailed anyway. I attached the insurance schedule. I included screenshots of Dad's texts about specific serial numbers. I explained that my father was incapacitated near the end, that my stepmother was moving quickly, that the estate process hadn't been transparent. Then I waited. 2 hours later, I got a reply. Short, professional, almost sterile. "Thank you for your message. We take ownership disputes seriously. Please provide proof of legal ownership or authority. Without documentation, the lots will remain scheduled." They weren't being cruel. They were being a business, and Dana was counting on that. That night, I drove back to Dad's house again. I told myself I was going to do one simple thing. Ask to see the watch safe, confirm what was left, take photos for my own record. Nothing dramatic. Dana opened the door, saw me, and her expression hardened. "You're becoming obsessive," she said, as if that was the worst crime a grieving son could commit. "I need to document what's happening," I said. "If those watches are being sold, I have a right to know what they were." Dana stepped forward so I couldn't see into the house. "You don't have a right to anything, not until probate is settled." "Then show me the will," I said. Dana's eyes flashed. "You don't get to demand things from me in my home." "Dad's home," I corrected. She laughed again, but it was sharp. "Not anymore." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw the truth. Dana wasn't just trying to sell watches. She was trying to sell the version of my father's life where I didn't matter. I left again. But I didn't go home. I drove straight to Martin's house. When he opened the door, he took one look at my face and stepped aside. In his living room, surrounded by shelves of books and framed photos, I told him I was stuck, that the auction house needed paperwork I didn't have, that Dana had locked me out of my father's decisions. Martin listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly like he'd been expecting this moment. "Richard tried to prepare you," he said, in his own way. "What do you mean?" I asked. Martin stood up and walked to a desk in the corner. He opened a drawer and pulled out a plain white envelope, slightly crumpled at the edges like it had been handled a few times. He held it out to me without drama. "Richard asked me to keep this," Martin said. "He didn't say exactly when to give it to you. He just said, if things got ugly, you'd know." My hands went cold as I took the envelope. It was sealed. On the front, in my dad's handwriting, were 3 words. "For Ethan. Paper. Matters." I stared at that envelope in my lap like it was going to bite me. Martin sat across from me, hands folded, giving me space. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of his refrigerator from the kitchen. My dad's handwriting on the front was unmistakable, clean, slightly slanted, the way he always wrote on birthday cards and tool labels. "For Ethan. Paper. Matters." I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open carefully, even though the paper ripped anyway. Inside were 3 things: a folded letter, a photocopy of a document with a notary stamp, and a small metal key taped to an index card that simply said, "Safe Deposit Box, First Horizon, South Park." My throat tightened so hard it felt like swallowing around a knot. I unfolded the letter first. It was dated 8 months before Dad died. Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm either gone or I'm not in a state to protect you from the kind of mess people create when they think nobody is watching. I'm sorry for that. I wanted to believe we'd handle things as a family, but I've learned that family sometimes becomes a word people use when they want you to back down. Here's what you need to know. 1. The watch collection is yours. I transferred ownership to you legally, not because you need the money, because you understand what it is. You won't let it be treated like scrap. 2. The originals are in the safe deposit box. Do not rely on verbal promises. Do not rely on what seems fair. Paper matters. 3. If Dana tries to sell or move anything quickly, don't fight her with anger. Fight her with documents. I love you. I'm proud of you. Keep your head clear. Dad. I read it twice, then a third time, slower, until the words blurred and my eyes burned. It wasn't just the content, it was the tone. Dad wasn't dramatic, not ever. So for him to write if Dana tries to sell or move anything quickly, felt like a quiet alarm he'd set months ago, hoping it would never need to ring. My fingers shook as I picked up the photocopied document. At the top it read, Assignment of Personal Property. It listed Richard Allen Richardson as the assigner and Ethan Michael Richardson as the assignee. Under property, it included a line that made my stomach drop in a different way because it was so specific, so deliberate. All wristwatches, pocket watches, watch parts, watch tools, associated documentation, boxes, warranty cards, service records, and related horological items currently in my possession or control, including items stored in my home safe and safe deposit box. There was a date. There were signatures. There was a notary stamp and seal. Even as a photocopy, it looked like the kind of document that didn't care about Dana's feelings. Martin watched my face carefully. He was very clear, he said. He knew, I whispered. He knew she'd do something like this. Martin nodded once. He didn't want you blindsided. I swallowed, trying to force my brain into action. The originals are in a safe deposit box. I need to get them. You'll need identification, Martin said. And depending on how the box is titled, you may need... I'm going tomorrow, I said, already standing. That night I barely slept. I kept imagining Dana's hands on my father's watches, packing them into bubble wrap, calling them junk, telling herself a story where she was the only victim. I replayed her voice. You don't have a right to anything. Not until probate is settled. I'd been raised not to see people as enemies, but Dana had made herself one by treating my father's life like inventory. The next morning I went straight to the bank branch in South Park the moment they opened. I brought my driver's license, my passport, and the photocopy, even though I knew a photocopy wouldn't open a box. I told the banker I needed access to a safe deposit box belonging to my father, Richard Richardson. The banker's expression turned professional and cautious. Are you listed on the box? I don't know, I admitted, but I may be. He left me the key. She took the key and examined the number. Then she typed for a while, eyes scanning her screen. After a minute, she looked up. This box is in the name of Ethan Michael Richardson. I blinked. Me? She nodded. You. Sole access. For a second I couldn't breathe. It felt like Dad was standing right behind me, steady hand on my shoulder, saying, Told you. The banker slid a form toward me. I signed, my signature shaky but legible. She led me to the vault with quiet steps and strict rules. No phones, no bags, no funny business. She opened the box with the bank's key while I held mine. There was a soft click, and the drawer came out. Inside was a thick manila envelope, a smaller black leather binder, and a sealed plastic bag containing what looked like warranty cards and receipts. I carried the contents to the private booth with the kind of reverence people usually reserve for ashes. The manila envelope had a typed label, Watch Collection, Ownership and Inventory. Inside were the originals, the same assignment of personal property but the real version, crisp signatures, real notary seal, a copy of Dad's ID attached, a witness page, everything, and then an inventory list that made my chest go tight. It wasn't just brand names, it had serial numbers, purchase dates, service history, box paper status, estimated value ranges, notes like bracelet needs tightening, and keep original dial. Dad had documented the collection like he was leaving behind a map, and at the very bottom of the inventory was one more note written in his handwriting. Any consignment or sale must be authorized by Ethan. Account on file. Account on file. That line was a door, and I could feel it. I flipped open the black binder. Inside were printouts of emails, some with an auction house letterhead. The name at the top of the email chain jumped out at me immediately. because it matched the auction house Martin had mentioned. It was an email thread between someone at the auction house and my dad, except the account holder name on the printed pages wasn't Richard Richardson. It was Ethan Richardson. I stared at it, confused at first, then slowly understanding. Dad had set up the relationship under my name. Whether it was for future consignment, appraisal, insurance, or just to have a professional record, he'd put my name on the file. The email content was mostly about appraisal questions and intake policies. Nothing dramatic, but the header alone felt like leverage. I left the bank with the originals secured in a folder under my arm, my whole body wired with adrenaline that grief had been holding back. I didn't go home. I didn't call Dana. I went straight to a lawyer. Not my dad's lawyer, because that office had already signaled they were aligned with Dana as personal representative, and I didn't trust how conflicts would be handled. I searched for an estate litigation attorney with good reviews and booked an emergency consultation. An hour later, I was sitting in a clean office across from a woman named Priya Desai, mid-40s, calm eyes, sharp voice, the kind of person who didn't waste words. I laid the documents on her desk, the assignment, the inventory, the email header printouts. She read them without speaking for several minutes. When she looked up, her expression didn't soften, but it clarified like she'd just located the spine of the problem. "This is strong," she said. "What does it actually mean?" I asked. "Can Dana still sell them? If this assignment is valid, and it appears to be properly executed, then those watches were no longer part of your father's estate," she said. "They became your personal property on the date of transfer." My heart hammered. "So she can't touch them." "She can try," Priya said. "People try all the time. But legally, no. If she knowingly consigned property she didn't own, that's a serious problem." I swallowed. "The auction is scheduled. The catalog is already up." "Then we move fast," she said, sliding the papers into a neat stack. "We notify the auction house's legal department with formal notice and proof. We request an immediate hold on the lots, and we tell them that proceeding with sale after notice exposes them to liability." "What about Dana?" I asked. Priya's eyes held mine. "We document everything. We do not threaten her. We do not trespass. We do not do anything emotional that turns you into a hostile stepson in her story. We let the paperwork speak." I nodded, but my hands were still shaking on my knees. "She already blocked me out. She's acting like I'm nothing." Priya leaned back slightly. "I'm going to say something that might be hard to hear. She's acting like that because it has probably worked for her before. The way you beat it is by refusing to play on her field." I took a breath. "Okay." Priya drafted a letter while I sat there. It was firm, clean, and deadly in its simplicity. Notice of ownership dispute. Demand to halt sale. Attached documentation proving transfer and ownership. Request for confirmation that lots were removed from auction pending review. She printed it, had me sign, then emailed it directly to the auction house's legal contact. She also recommended sending it certified mail. Before I left her office, she asked one more question. "Do you know how the watches got from the home to the auction house?" I hesitated. "No. Dana won't tell me, but Martin believes photos were taken at my dad's bench, so she had physical access." Priya nodded. "That matters. If you can prove she removed your property from your father's home after his death, we can escalate. But first we freeze the sale." On my way out, my phone buzzed. A notification from the auction house. An automated email about upcoming bidding excitement. It felt like an insult, like the world didn't know it was about to sell a piece of my father's life. I drove home, parked, and sat in my car with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel again, just like the day Dana called to tell me Dad was gone. Except this time, I wasn't numb. I was focused. That evening, the auction house finally responded to Priya's email. It wasn't a full admission. It wasn't an apology. It was cautious and legal sounding. "Thank you for your notice. We are reviewing the documentation. The lots in question will be placed under administrative hold pending verification." Administrative hold. I read those two words 3 times, letting them sink in like medicine. The sale wasn't stopped forever, but it was stopped for now. And for the first time since Dad died, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Then Dana called me. Not text, not voicemail. A direct call at 8:47 p.m., like she knew something had shifted and she needed to get ahead of it. I stared at her name on the screen, heart pounding. I answered. "What did you do?" she asked, and her voice wasn't polished anymore. It was tight, controlled panic wrapped in anger. I kept my tone even. "I protected my property." "Your property?" Dana snapped. "Those watches belong to Richard's estate." "They don't," I said. There was a sharp inhale on her end. You have no proof. I looked at the folder on my kitchen table, the notary seal, the inventory, my father's handwriting. I do, I said quietly. Dana's voice dropped into something colder. If you're trying to steal from me while I'm grieving, don't, I cut in. My voice stayed calm, but there was steel in it now. Don't turn this into a grief contest. You told me they were worthless. You told me you needed money. If that's true, then why are you so angry the sale is on hold? Silence. Then she changed tactics, just like I knew she would. You're being manipulated, she said, suddenly soft. Richard wasn't himself near the end, you know that. Someone could have talked him into signing anything. That one landed like a slap, because it was the kind of accusation that could poison everything, make Dad look incompetent, make me look predatory. I clenched my jaw. The document is dated 8 months before he died, I said. He was still working, still driving, still managing his finances, and he had it notarized. Dana's voice rose. You're attacking me. I'm the widow. You're the person who tried to sell my father's watches behind my back, I said. Another pause. Then in a tone so controlled it sounded almost careful, she said, Fine. If you want them, you can buy them. Pay me what they're worth, and we'll call it even. There it was. Not grief, not necessity. A negotiation. I'm not buying my own property from you, I said. Dana's voice hardened again. Then you're going to regret making me your enemy. I almost laughed, but nothing about it was funny. Dana, I said, I didn't make you my enemy. You did. The day you decided my father's life could be sold off like a garage sale. She hung up. I stood there in my quiet kitchen. The call ended. My hands trembling not from fear this time, but from the realization of what was coming. Dana wasn't going to back down because of one letter. She was going to fight. And if she couldn't win legally, she'd try to win socially by turning relatives, friends, anyone who would listen into a jury. And somewhere in the middle of all that, the auction house was holding my dad's watches, waiting for certainty. Paper mattered, but so did time. The next morning, I woke up to a message from my aunt, my dad's older sister, Linda. It was a screenshot of a Facebook post Dana had written sometime after midnight. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. It was one of those carefully worded posts people make when they want sympathy and an audience, not solutions. Grief reveals people's true character. I'm shocked and heartbroken by the selfishness I've faced since losing my husband. Please pray for peace during this difficult time. Under it were comments from distant cousins and old family friends. So sorry, Dana, stay strong. Some people are just greedy. Richard would be ashamed. Linda's message read, Call me, now. I sat up in bed, feeling that familiar heat behind my eyes. Anger mixed with grief, like my body didn't know which emergency to handle first. I called Linda and she answered immediately. Tell me you're not doing something stupid, she said. Not accusing. Worried. I'm not, I said. I'm doing something documented. Linda exhaled. Dana called me at 7 a.m. She said you're harassing her and trying to steal Richard's things. I haven't even been in the house since she blocked me, I said. She's the one who sent Dad's watches to auction. Linda went quiet. She said they're worthless. They're not, I said. And even if they were, that's not the point. Dad transferred them to me before he died. Linda paused. Transferred how? Legally, I said. And my voice went flat with control. Notarized assignment of personal property. Originals in a safe deposit box in my name. There was another pause, longer this time. Then Linda said slowly, Richard did that? Yes. And Dana didn't know. She knew enough to move fast, I said. She didn't expect me to have paper. Linda swore under her breath, which for her was rare. Then she said, Email me copies. I'll keep them. And Ethan. Don't talk to her alone anymore, Linda said. She'll twist it. I promised I wouldn't. After we hung up, I forwarded the documents to Linda and to myself in multiple places like I was backing up a server before a storm. Then I called Priya. She's starting a smear campaign, I told her. Priya didn't sound surprised. That's typical. Let her talk. We're going to make the auction house stop, and we're going to create a record of her behavior. Do not respond publicly. What if family believes her? Priya's answer was blunt. Then family will learn the truth later, or they won't. Your goal isn't to win hearts right now. It's to secure your property and protect yourself legally. I hated how right she was. By noon, the auction house replied again. This time it wasn't a generic "we're reviewing." It was a request. We require a meeting or call to verify ownership and consignment authority. Please provide contact availability. Priya set a call for that afternoon with their legal counsel and consignment manager. She told me to be present but to let her do most of the talking. When the call started, I recognized the consignment manager's name from Martin's story. Her voice was calm, careful, professional. Their legal counsel opened with the same phrase businesses always use when they're about to protect themselves. We appreciate your prompt communication. Our goal is to resolve this efficiently and appropriately, Priya said. We share that goal. My client has provided a notarized assignment transferring the property to him prior to decedent's death. He contests the consignor's authority. The counsel paused. Understood. We do have documentation from the consignor. My pulse jumped. From Dana, I thought. Of course you do, the consignment manager said. Mr. Richardson, can you confirm whether you have ever consigned items with our company before? I took a breath. No, not personally, but my father may have established contact. I found email records. She said. Yes, that matches our internal notes. Then their counsel said something that made my whole spine go rigid. There is an inconsistency we need to clarify. Priya's voice stayed even. Go on. The consignment agreement on file, the counsel said, lists the consignor as Ethan Richardson. The room went silent on my end. Like even the air stopped moving. I glanced at Priya, and she didn't look surprised. She looked focused, like she'd just spotted the pressure point. The consignment manager continued. We also have an intake delivery form signed at drop-off, but the signature does not match the Ethan Richardson signature in our system. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it was trying to climb out of my throat. Priya spoke carefully. To confirm, you have a contract naming my client as consignor, but someone else delivered the items and signed. Yes, the counsel said. And until we understand that discrepancy, the lots remain on administrative hold. I felt a cold, clear wave of understanding. Dana hadn't just tried to sell my dad's watches. She'd tried to use my name to do it, and she'd done it sloppily. Priya asked, can you provide copies of the consignment agreement and delivery form? The counsel hesitated. We can provide redacted copies for review under confidentiality, yes. Priya said, please do, immediately. When the call ended, I sat there in my kitchen staring at my laptop screen, my hands numb. Dad's note echoed again. Paper matters. He hadn't just transferred the watches, he'd positioned my name inside the auction process itself like a tripwire, and Dana had stepped on it. 2 hours later, Priya forwarded me a PDF package the auction house had sent. I opened it with my fingers shaking. The first document was titled, Consignment Agreement. At the top, consignor name, Ethan Michael Richardson. My address, an older one, from when I'd lived in a townhouse closer to Uptown years ago, an address Dad would have known. Dana probably wouldn't. The email listed on the account was my old Gmail address, the one I'd used in college and still kept active. And then next to consignor's signature was a signature that looked like someone had tried to imitate mine after seeing it once. The letters were wrong, the slant was wrong, the pressure points were wrong. It wasn't my signature, but my name was on the contract. I scrolled to the delivery form. It had a timestamp. The drop-off happened 9 days after my dad died. Under delivered by, it listed Dana Richardson, and the signature was hers. Clear, confident, with a little flourish at the end like she wanted the world to know she existed. In the notes section, the intake staff had written, Consignor not present, delivered by spouse of decedent, requesting fast turnaround, needs funds for expenses. My stomach turned. Priya called me immediately after I texted her. I have the docs. Do not contact Dana, she said first. I wasn't going to, I said, but my voice sounded rough. Priya continued. This is bigger than a family argument now. This shows she represented herself as an agent for you, or she forged your signature, or both. The auction house is going to protect itself by freezing everything and documenting her. And if she pushes, it becomes criminal territory. I sat down hard in my chair. So what happens next? Next, Priya said. We respond to the auction house confirming you did not sign, did not authorize, and you demand the return of your property. Also, I want you to gather proof of your signature, driver's license, passport, anything, so we can show the mismatch. I did it immediately. I scanned my license, passport, an old mortgage document, even a work HR form with my signature. While I was doing that, my phone buzzed again. Dana. This time it wasn't a call. It was a text. Stop contacting people. You're embarrassing yourself. I stared at it, Then at the auction contract PDF on my screen, my name, her signature, embarrassing myself. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the text to Priya. Then I got another message. This time from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Dude, why are you doing this to Dana? She's alone. I felt my chest tighten. That familiar urge rose up, the urge to explain, to defend, to shout the truth until everyone nodded and apologized. But Priya was right. If I started arguing with family members, Dana would use every reaction as proof I was unstable. So I replied with one line. I'm handling it through legal counsel. Please don't get involved. I turned off my phone after that. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the one detail that made everything feel personal in a way I hadn't fully processed yet. Dana had to access my dad's watch safe to get those pieces, which meant she had the combination or had the safe opened, which meant at some point, either before Dad died or immediately after, she had been in the closet, in his private space, taking what wasn't hers, while I was still standing outside the door being told I didn't have rights. I lay awake replaying small moments. Dana appearing in doorways. Dana organizing. Dana moving the watch box because it was clutter. It wasn't clutter. It was control. The next morning, Priya sent a formal response to the auction house with the signature comparison and a demand for immediate return. Within 3 hours, the auction house replied with a short statement that felt like a hammer wrapped in velvet. We will not proceed with the sale. The lots are withdrawn. We will require the consignor of record, Ethan Richardson, to confirm return arrangements. Additionally, we will be notifying the delivery party that we cannot release any proceeds and that the matter may require further reporting. Withdrawing the lots was one thing, but further reporting was the line that told me Dana had finally hit the edge of her own bluff, because Dana's whole strategy depended on speed and silence. She wanted the watches sold before anyone could argue, money transferred before anyone could question, and me kept far enough away that I'd look like a bitter son complaining after the fact. But now the auction house had documentation showing something ugly, a contract naming me, a delivery by Dana, a signature mismatch, and a legal notice from my attorney. There was no way to spin that as grief. That afternoon, Priya told me the auction house wanted an in-person identity verification before releasing the items. Chain of custody. Standard procedure now that there was a dispute. I drove there with Priya's instructions running through my head like a checklist. Be calm. Be polite. Say as little as necessary. Let them talk. Get everything in writing. When I walked into the auction house lobby, it felt too normal. People were browsing jewelry displays. A receptionist was smiling. Someone was sipping coffee like nothing in the building could possibly matter more than the weather. But for me, it felt like stepping into the middle of a theft. The consignment manager met me in a small office. She looked tired, the way people look when their day has been hijacked by someone else's chaos. Mr. Richardson, she said, shaking my hand. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry you're dealing with this. Thank you, I said, and meant it. She slid a folder across the desk. Before we go any further, I need you to understand our position. We rely on consignor representations, but when we received your notice and reviewed the file, we saw problems. Yeah, I said quietly. So did I. She opened the folder to the consignment agreement with my name at the top. Do you recognize this contract? She asked. I recognize my name. I said. I didn't sign it. I didn't authorize anyone to sign it. I didn't even know the watches were here until I saw the catalog. She nodded, like that answer matched what she already believed. Then she said, carefully, when the delivery was made, the party told our intake team she was the decedent's spouse and was handling the estate. She also said you were unavailable and that she had permission. My jaw tightened. She lied. The consignment manager didn't argue. She just turned the page and pointed at a small section near the bottom of the agreement. This is why this is complicated, she said. Our system generated the agreement under your name because your father previously asked to set the account up that way. The consignor of record is you. My chest felt tight again, but this time it was something like relief mixed with grief. Dad had done that on purpose, not to sell them, to make sure nobody could sell them without me, I said. So even if she convinced someone she was the spouse, the paperwork still pointed back to me. The consignment manager's mouth pressed into a line. Correct. Which is why the sale was stopped. The minute we saw that, we couldn't proceed. She slid another document forward. We also need you to know, no proceeds were released. Nothing was sold. I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for weeks. Can I see them? I asked. She hesitated. We can bring them out for identification in a secure room. A few minutes later, she led me through a side hallway into a small windowless room with a table and a camera in the corner. An employee entered carrying a hard plastic bin. Inside were padded watch rolls in individual boxes. When she unrolled the first one, I saw my dad's Seamaster. The navy dial caught the light in a way that made my throat close instantly. It wasn't just an object. It was my father's hands, his quiet Saturday mornings, his steady voice telling me not to flash it. I didn't cry, not because I didn't want to, because I was holding myself together by force of will. I identified each piece against the inventory list Dad had made. Serial numbers matched. The familiar wear patterns matched. Everything was there, until I reached the end and noticed something missing. One watch wasn't in the bin, the one Dad wore the most, the one he wore on his wedding day with my mom, and later still wore even after she left, the one he called the Old Faithful, his silver chronograph, Dad's favorite. I looked up sharply. Where's the last one? The consignment manager frowned and checked the intake list. It should be here. I felt a cold wave crawl up my spine, because if that watch wasn't here, it meant Dana might still have one piece of my father's collection in her pocket, and if she'd kept it, it wasn't for money, it was for leverage. The consignment manager double-checked the bin, the padded rolls, the small boxes, even the packing slips like the missing watch might be hiding under paper. It wasn't. She looked up at me, and for the first time her professional calm cracked into something more human, concern mixed with irritation. This is listed on the intake photos, she said. I remember it. It was one of the pieces that raised questions, actually. I swallowed. You have photos? Yes, she said. We photograph each item at intake for condition and identification. Then can you pull up the photo? I asked. She nodded and stepped out of the room. I sat at that table staring at the empty space where my dad's favorite watch should have been, and it felt like losing him again in a smaller, sharper way. Because that watch wasn't just valuable, it was familiar. It was the watch I remembered on his wrist when he taught me to drive. The watch I saw when he signed my college loan paperwork. The watch he wore when he stood in the driveway and hugged me before I moved into my first apartment. He didn't wear it to impress anyone. He wore it because it was his. A few minutes later, the consignment manager came back with a laptop and an intake folder. She opened a series of images, close-up shots of each watch on a green mat. There it was. My dad's chronograph photographed from multiple angles. The case, the dial, even the small nick near one lug that Dad always pointed out like it was a birthmark. The timestamp was the same intake date as everything else. So it was here, I said, keeping my voice steady. Yes, she replied, which means one of two things. Either it was removed before it was processed into storage, or it was never placed into the bin when everything was pulled for you. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she said it, like she already knew which possibility was worse for her business. I took a breath. I'm not accusing your company of theft, I said, but I need a clear chain of custody. That watch matters. The consignment manager nodded quickly. Understood. We're going to audit it internally. Immediately. I left the auction house with two things happening at once inside me. Relief, because the sale was stopped and the collection was mostly intact, and a cold, sharpened certainty that Dana had kept the one watch that meant the most because she knew exactly what she was doing. On the drive home, I didn't call her. I didn't text. I didn't give her anything she could twist. I called Priya. One watch is missing, I said. Her voice tightened. Which one? I told her. There was a pause. Okay, she said, calm again. We handle it the same way. Paper. Procedure. We request it formally. If she refuses, we escalate. What does escalate mean? It can mean a demand letter with a deadline, Priya said. It can mean filing for replevin, court order for return of personal property. And if it looks like she forged your signature and knowingly took property not hers, there can be criminal implications. But we move carefully. I stared through my windshield at a red light, hands clenched on the wheel. She's going to say it was a gift. Then she needs proof, Priya said, and she won't have it, because your father documented everything. That afternoon, the consignment manager emailed me an update. They'd reviewed their internal handling logs and camera footage from the intake area. The chronograph had been photographed at intake, placed in a tray, and then the footage showed Dana requesting to take one personal item back because it had sentimental value and she wanted to keep it. According to the staff notes, they allowed it because she was the spouse and the situation was emotional. They didn't have the ownership dispute yet, and they made a judgment call. A bad one. But now it was documented. I read that email twice, my stomach hollowing out with anger. Dana had looked someone in the eye, after my dad died, and said she wanted to keep a sentimental item, and she chose the watch my dad loved most. Not a photograph, not a letter, not one of his old fishing hats, the one thing she knew would hurt. Priya's demand letter went out the next morning. It was short and merciless in the way only good legal writing can be. The watch is property of Ethan Richardson by notarized assignment. Dana Richardson had no authority to remove it. Evidence indicates she requested its return from the auction house after consignment intake. She must return the watch by a specific deadline or legal action will follow. We attached the intake photo, the email acknowledgement, and the assignment document. I didn't expect Dana to answer with humility, but I didn't expect what she did next either. She showed up at my job. I was in a hospital IT closet, halfway through replacing a network switch, when security called my extension and told me someone was in the lobby asking for me very insistently. When I walked out, Dana was standing near the reception desk like she owned the air around her. Hair perfect, outfit sharp, face composed, but her eyes were different, too bright, too tight. She stepped toward me. "We need to talk." I kept my voice low. "Not here." "You're destroying my life," she hissed, just loud enough for me to hear and just quiet enough to deny later. I stared at her, feeling something in me go calm in a way that surprised me. "No," I said. "You tried to sell what wasn't yours, and now you're facing consequences." Dana's expression flickered. Rage, fear, calculation, like she was switching masks too quickly. "You don't understand," she said. "I have expenses. The house is not why you did this," I said, cutting her off. "You called them worthless. If you needed money, you would have sold something you actually owned and told the truth. You did this because you wanted control." Dana's jaw tensed. "Your father didn't leave you anything." "Yes, he did," I said, "and he left it in writing." People were starting to glance our way. Dana noticed, and I saw the instant she adjusted, shoulders softer, eyes sadder. "I'm trying to keep things together," she said louder, "for the benefit of strangers. You're being so aggressive." I felt my stomach turn at how smooth she was. I lowered my voice even more. "If you came here to intimidate me, leave. If you came here to return the watch, do it through my attorney." Dana leaned closer and said, in that private voice again, "I'm not giving you that watch." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten her. I just looked at her and said, "Then you're going to explain to the police why you have property you weren't authorized to take. And you're going to explain to a judge why there's a consignment contract with my name on it that I didn't sign." Dana's face went pale for half a second, and that half second told me everything. She hadn't expected the paperwork to connect back to her. She had expected me to be emotional, loud, easy to dismiss. Instead, Dad had left me a path made of documents. Dana's composure returned quickly. She straightened her posture and gave a small, pained smile to the receptionist, like she was apologizing for my behavior. Then she turned and walked out. 2 days passed with no response. On the third day, I got a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Richardson, this is Officer Klein with CMPD. I'm returning a call regarding a property dispute." My heart jumped. Priya had warned me escalation might involve law enforcement if we framed it properly and had documentation. I called Priya immediately. She told me she had made a report, not as a dramatic arrest her move, but as a formal record, disputed ownership, evidence of forged signature, evidence of removal of property after notice. It wasn't revenge, it was protection. That same evening, Dana emailed Priya. Not me, Priya, and the tone was completely different. Dana claimed the watch was a personal gift and that she was shocked by the threatening approach. She said she had done nothing wrong and that my father would be heartbroken by how I was acting. But she also included one line that mattered more than all the emotional language combined. "If Ethan wants the watch, I am willing to return it to avoid further conflict." Avoid further conflict. Not because it's his, not because I'm sorry, because she wanted the pressure off. Priya replied with instructions. Return it through her office, in person, in a sealed package, with an acknowledgement of receipt. Dana complied. The following afternoon, I sat in Priya's office while her assistant brought in a small padded envelope. It was sealed with tape, like Dana didn't even want the air touching it. Priya opened it in front of me, with a witness present, documenting everything, and then my dad's chronograph was in my hands. It was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe my grief made it feel that way. The bracelet was slightly loose, the way Dad always kept it. The crystal caught the light. The hands were stopped, like it hadn't been wound in days. I turned it over and saw the engraving on the back, faint, worn from years of use. For a moment my throat closed so hard I couldn't speak. Priya watched me quietly, not intruding. I swallowed and managed. "Thank you." She nodded once. "Now we decide how far you want to take this." Because it wasn't just about getting the watch back anymore. Dana had forged my signature on a consignment contract. She had attempted to sell property that wasn't part of the estate. She had removed at least one item after the dispute was raised, and she had tried to poison the story socially so I'd look like the greedy son attacking the grieving widow. The next step could have been court, criminal charges, a full public unraveling, and I won't pretend I didn't want it at first. There's a part of you, when someone tries to erase you, that wants to erase them back. But then I thought about what Dad wrote. Don't fight her with anger. Fight her with documents. And I realized something else too. Dana's punishment had already started. The auction house, a reputable one, had flagged her internally. They sent her a formal notice that due to misrepresentation and the ownership dispute, they would no longer accept consignments from her without enhanced verification. That kind of note doesn't stay in one inbox. It follows you in that industry. Priya also notified the probate attorney with documentation that Dana's actions might constitute attempted conversion of non-estate property. That meant every move Dana made as personal representative would be watched more closely. And then there was the family. Because Linda didn't stay quiet. She didn't post dramatic rants. She didn't attack Dana publicly. She did something far more effective. She told the truth privately, with receipts. She showed my dad's siblings the notarized assignment. She showed them the consignment agreement with my name. She showed them the auction house withdrawal notice. And one by one, the "Stay strong, Dana" comments stopped. A week later, I got a message from the same cousin who accused me of being cruel. "Hey, I didn't know the whole story. I'm sorry." I stared at that message for a long time before replying. "It's fine," I wrote. "Just be careful who you believe when paperwork exists." Dana never apologized to me. Not once. But she didn't come after the watches again. She didn't try to bargain. She didn't try to buy me out of my own property. Because she couldn't. The documents had closed the door. A month later, I picked up the rest of the collection from the auction house. They returned everything in sealed containers with a detailed inventory receipt, and the consignment manager personally walked me through each item, clearly trying to make sure their company didn't become the villain in a story that wasn't theirs. I didn't gloat. I didn't punish them. They made a mistake trusting a grieving spouse without verifying authority. But when I loaded those cases into my trunk, I felt something I hadn't felt since Dad died. Not happiness. Something steadier. Like my father's voice wasn't completely gone, because he'd built a bridge for me to cross when he couldn't stand there himself. I moved the watches into a safe in my own home, not just because of Dana, but because I finally understood what Dad meant by protecting things properly. And I kept one watch out, the chronograph. I had it serviced at the same shop Dad used. I even brought the old service receipts, because Dad would have liked that. When the watchmaker handed it back to me, running smoothly again, I sat in my car for a while and just watched the second-hand sweep. Time doesn't heal the way people promise. It doesn't patch over betrayal or make grief smaller, but it does reveal what lasts. Here's what I learned from all of it. Some people will call your memories clutter because they can't control them. Some people will label what you love as worthless because they want you to stop fighting for it. And some people will smile in public while forging your name in private. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Don't argue with manipulation on emotional ground. It's their home turf. Get your facts, get your documents, get your witnesses, because in the end, the loudest person in the room isn't the one who wins. The paper is.